What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Simplify. I'm your host, Zack. Solo show today, sort of an emergency pod on the state of realignment in college football. A lot of news broke on Friday, and I was not able to record anything because I was out of town, away from my setup, and we're going to get into everything here today. I'm also making a solo show because I'm not going to make my wonderful co-hosts listen to me on a rant about how much I hate this round of realignment. Just one thing of podcast news to take care of before we get into it. If you're listening to this on the 8th, Tuesday, the Simplify 2023 hype video will be coming out at noon. If you're listening to it after that point, the hype video's out. Go and check it out. I'll have the tweet pinned to the Twitter profile at SimplifyPod once it goes live. So if you're listening to this before noon on the 8th, it's not up yet. So just, I don't know, put an alarm in your phone or something like that. So let's get into the conference realignment news. Sort of a recap first, because there was a lot of stuff that happened this weekend. First order was that Colorado jumped to the Big 12. It was the first Pac-12 team to leave since USC and UCLA. There's a lot of hubbub about whether they were getting a deal then or not. Basically, you heard every single possibility of they're staying together, everyone's leaving for this league, they're going to merge with the ACC. And then on Friday, you sort of had a real roller coaster of a day. Early in the day, it looked like they were going to wrap up the deal, have those 9 teams stay. And then by the end of the day, realistically, the conference is now dead. Oregon and Washington jumped to the Big Ten, joining USC and UCLA. And then Arizona officially makes the jump to the Big 12 after being rumored for a little while after Colorado left. And then they're shortly followed by Arizona State and Utah. So now we've got the Pac-4 of Washington State, Oregon State, Stanford, and Cal. Now today there was some pretty, this is Monday the 7th, this could be completely wrong by the time this podcast comes out. There are rumors today or reporting that the ACC is holding, exploratory meetings or some sort of preliminary effort at looking to add Cal and Stanford. Washington State and Oregon State are still, no one's claimed them. They might go Mountain West. Nobody really knows. There's no reporting on anyone wanting them. There was a report today that the Pac-12 commissioner asked the Big 12 if they would merge if they took everyone except those 2 schools. So they're really getting the short end of the stick here. My take on the ACC's thing, really quick, is I don't like it. I don't like these bi-coastal conferences. But if they're going to do this to try and prolong the life of this conference farther than people expect it to go, you should probably just add all 4 of those schools. Washington State and Oregon State have very passionate fan bases, and with the way the ACC is structured right now in this sort of protopod system where, each team has 3 other dedicated rivals, just take the 4 and make them all play each other every year in football. But apparently they're not really interested. Moving into, sort of this recurring theme of Florida State being very loud about wanting to leave. I'm not buying that they are going to be leaving anytime soon. Like I said in the last episode, they would owe something in the range of $30 million a year to the conference. Ironically, I think that would actually strengthen the teams that was leaving because they're just going to take that $30 million and pocket it amongst themselves. And that money is prohibitive. You'd be behind the schools in your new conference. Look at Oregon and Washington. They're not even getting a full revenue share once they join. So you're shooting yourself in the foot even farther to make up that $30 million deficit. I mean, there were reports that they were looking for outside funding from Chase, and that is something that cannot happen. You cannot have a venture capital firm being in charge of your football team. What happens when you go 1-11 and people lent you, $300 million to leave a conference? The main reason, or another reason I'm not buying, is I think Chris Peak said this, but the admin and everyone sort of making a huge deal of Florida State wanting to leave. They're making that huge deal. They're very loud in public. And you think back to all these realignment deals of this last round. Texas, Oklahoma, USC, UCLA were bombshell last-second drops, and everything was really kept under wraps well. So the more someone is talking about wanting to leave and wanting to find a new conference or someone or some team or school, the less I put faith in it, because even with the demise of the Pac-12, right, we didn't have definitive news one way or the other. We were getting all these conflicting reports, and then the final news just dropped at the last second. It wasn't like there weren't rumors. The schools weren't outwardly talking about wanting to leave, anything like that. Now, at least with the Pac-12, that last minute thing was they got the numbers back from the deal, and they were going to be I think $10 million behind base of the ACC and Big 12, and then they could make it up in subscriber numbers on Apple TV, and that is just a terrible idea. But getting back to the point, those four big schools, the four big brand schools, Texas, OU, UCLA, and USC, they were all quiet. They moved in silence before they jumped conferences. And I think that Florida State being loud about it is something that tells you that they are being loud for the sake of being loud. If they had a move, they had a conference jump lined up, if they really had a way out of the ACC, if they really had a way to break the grant of rights, they would have done it. They wouldn't be having press conferences about saying they want to leave or money needs to change. If they had a way to do it, they would have done it by now, because we've seen other schools make the jump for money. And if a school is talking about it and hasn't done anything, they don't have a way out. And that's sort of my take on the whole Florida State situation. So with the news and recap out of the way, I just kind of want to get my thoughts on this round realignment out there. And I don't think I'm alone in saying that I don't like it. It's making me sad. It really is. The more I think about it, it's sort of this. I don't really want to call it a death spiral, but it sort of is like a death spiral of college football and what the sport has meant for so long. It's a sport that's being changed by league offices and the TV executives who, what we're moving towards is an NFL light. And, I like the NFL. I root for an NFL team, even though they're awful. I'm a Jets fan. I'll still watch the NFL every Sunday because it's the NFL. But I don't watch college football because I want to watch NFL light. I want to watch college football. And these companies, which are, setting up these extremely inflated TV deals, are just trying to make, they're looking to squeeze profit out of college football and not keep it as what makes it special, and that's sort of a trend in American life right now. But this has been one of the most special sports in this country for well over a century. And when Texas and Oklahoma left for the SEC, it didn't sit right with me. I didn't like the move. I thought it was wrong for the traditions and the history of the sport. But I think that was sort of offset by the Big 12 being able to stabilize. It called up the top G5 teams, and it kept the league intact. You brought in new rivalries with Houston, who's going to play a bunch of teams in Texas. You paired WVU with Cincy, and you reward UCF for being one of the best G5 programs over the last decade, or really coming up and to the top of the G5. But now I look back at this after after the USC and UCLA leave. I believe that was last year they announced that, and then Oregon and Washington follow suit, and I feel worse looking back on it, especially because now the Pac-12 couldn't rebound. They, for some reason, TV companies and broadcasting companies wouldn't give them any money to keep these 9 schools together, but somehow they are worth the money when they're chopped up into different conferences, split apart from each other, which doesn't make sense when you sort of step back and look at it. Obviously the difference is they're playing Ohio State now, and these are helmet games, but that's not That's not why you watch college football. If you're a fan of a college football team, you are a fan of your team, and you want to see them beat your rivals and teams they have history with. And, everyone gets excited for a nice out-of-conference game, but I don't think that out-of-conference games and helmet games are the reason why your average college football fan watches the sport. And, it's not like the Pac-12 is some new conference that doesn't have much history dating back to the sports origins. Like, the Big Ten's been around for 100 years. No, the Pac-12 has been around in some form since 1915. Cal, Washington, Oregon State are founding members of the conference. Washington State and Stanford both joined within 5 years of the conference existing. Arizona and Arizona State have been members for over 40 years. Utah built its program up from the WAC to the Mountain West and was rewarded for years of success with the Pac-12 invite. And the four helmet schools, USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington, they left for the money, and they killed an entire conference in the wake. And, all these other schools who aren't getting invited to the new Power 2 leagues, their reward is for the conference to die at the hands of these four schools that think they're better than the rest of them. And, especially now with the news that nobody wants Washington State and Oregon State, I can't help but just feel horrible for these fan bases. All this talk of potential new conferences for everyone else, and I guess the new conferences now that it's official. I kind of wrote this before all the news happened. Their big brothers leave them and for huge money deals, and we still haven't heard a peep of any other conference wanting these two programs. Everyone expects them to find a landing spot in the Mountain West, for them to take a step down and go to the G5. Culturally, they'll be at home, and they'll play schools that their fan base will forge new rivalries with. Well, that's my cat. But that's a consolation. That's a consolation that they get to keep playing football. It's probably going to completely wreck the athletic budgets of these schools. They're probably taking a cut in their profit to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. And the only fault they had is that they were loyal to a conference they spent over a century playing in. Washington State has one of the country's most loyal fan bases. They show up for games year in, year out at one of the most historically inept football schools ever. And nobody cares that they have fan bases, that they're, by the numbers, in the top half of viewership in the Pac-12. No student at television office cares about the rich and storied tradition of Wazoo. No one cares about the Apple Cup. No one cares that they have fans. They only care about the helmet. And it's a helmet that Wazoo playing Ohio State doesn't sell the same as Ohio State playing Oregon or Washington. And it's such a cynical way to think about the sport at the top from the people who are making these decisions when, if you go on the street and ask your average fan, do you think they really give a shit about TV ratings? No, they want to watch a game that means something to them. And, ironically, this realignment is the exact opposite of what we're seeing in the Group of Five. Look at what the Sun Belt is doing. Look what the MAC, look at the Mountain West. These conferences know what makes football special. They're local, Mountain West less so, but they are still in the West. Regional rivalries, and these rivalries that light a spark in fan bases' hearts. Let's take a look at the Sun Belt for a second, because I was going through their membership timeline, and it is an interesting case study. In 2005, that's about, it's only 18 years ago, their membership was Arkansas State, Louisiana Lafayette, FIU, Middle Tennessee, New Mexico State, North Texas, Idaho, Louisiana Monroe, Utah State, and Troy. That is a weird, fucked up conference. It looks like one of these super conferences that we have going right now. Now, this was a short-lived conference, to be fair. Idaho, New Mexico State, and Utah State were short-lived members. They moved to the WAC in 2005, even though Idaho and Utah State some just came back for another stretch in 2014 to 2018. And then in 2013, they were rated for the other half of these teams, including for new members, WKU and FAU, who jumped from the Sun Belt to the CUSA. But from 2014 onward, the Sun Belt has completely rebranded itself as a local conference with local ties. They kept the two Louisiana schools, Troy and Arkansas State, and then they added the following schools to build out their conference. They got Texas State to pair with Arkansas State. They got Appalachian State and Georgia Southern, bitter rivals from the FCS ranks. Georgia State provide another rival to Georgia Southern. Coastal Carolina, another school in that Atlantic Seaboard bubble region. You bring in South Alabama to pair with Troy. And then in 2022, they bring in James Madison, Marshall, Old Dominion, and Southern Miss. James Madison and Old Dominion, obviously, to get a foothold in Virginia, but Marshall moving into that more Appalachian range. But Southern Miss is right in the heart of the Sun Belt, and they all fit into that Sun Belt footprint. And I think that's sort of any fan's ideal realignment, right? It's to take a bunch of schools within day trip range of each other, you put the heat on simmer, and you shake up the schools until they fucking hate each other. I mean, I don't know anyone who wants a super league. I don't think if we get to that point, I don't think the teams are going to want it. You're not going to want to have to, if you're a college football coach, you're not going to want to have to play 12 games against all the school's best teams. It just lowers your program's floor to a point that, I don't know, I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is what it should look like. It should be a regional thing. And all right, before I complain anymore, I want to kind of find the roots of this round of realignment, right? And I would say the day would be November 17th, 2012, and that's the day that Maryland and Rutgers leave for the Big Ten. That obviously, it's been talked to death. That's completely a money deal. Is to get the Big Ten into the Northeastern TV market, which ironically they moved to streaming only a couple years later. I mean, you could argue that the Big East slowly being picked apart through the 2000s is the real start of this. First Miami, VT, and BC in the middle of the 2000s, then Pitt, Syracuse, and Louisville a decade later after, the league wasn't the same after those three left. It's a fair point. But to make my point, I want to talk about Maryland and Rutgers. And, since they moved to a bigger money league, they have been at the bottom of the barrel of the league pretty much the whole time they've been there. I mean, Maryland's had some decent seasons. Rutgers had an okay first season, but for the most part, they're getting dragged through the mud by teams they have no historical connection to. I mean, it sort of bastardized the idea of a conference. You're no longer playing games that your fans truly care about. You're just in it to line the pockets of your athletic department in a conference you can't compete in. I think Texas and Oklahoma are in for rude awakening calls when they go to the SEC and they go to an away game in Arkansas and they get absolutely whomped. USC and UCLA are going to be miserable in the Big Ten. I mean, I don't think either of them are as good as Ohio State and Michigan. Then, the first Iowa night game they go to, they're going to get destroyed. Or how about the first time they're playing in Minnesota snow? They can claim that playing in Washington snow is the same, but it's not. Anyone who's from anywhere in the Midwest knows it's not the same. It's warmer in Seattle. It's a lot warmer. And, the whole point, like I said before, it's helmet games. But are these helmet games fulfilling to a fan base? I don't think so. I think they're hollow. Because, yeah, it's cool to play a good team, but does your fan base really hate Ohio State? Do they really care that, probably most years they're going to lose to Ohio State. I think the novelty is going to wear off fast once you're losing to these teams pretty consistently. And then, one more thing to sort of make my point. How many of these teams since that mid-2000s realignment, right? How many of them have been successful in their new conference? And so I went through the numbers, right? I'm going to go by conference record because out of conference is sort of something that is less affected by your new conference. So let's start with Boston College. They've been in the ACC since 2005. Since then, they're 65 and 81 in conference, good for a 445 win percentage. Virginia Tech, since 2004 has been in the ACC. They're 95 and 50, by far and away the best record. But since that's sort of inflated by those really good teams they had in the early 2000s, they would have been good in any conference. So since 2014, they've got a .506 winning percentage. Miami in the ACC since 2004, they're 86 and 67, good for a .562 win percentage. Texas A&M is 48 and 41 in the SEC, good for a .539. Missouri is 41 and 49, good for a .456. Maryland, since 2014, is 23 and 52. That's a .307 win percentage. They've never been over 500 in conference play. Rutgers is the example that you have to bring up. Rutgers is 13 and 66 in Big Ten play, a 165 winning percentage. They've never been over 500 in the conference. They have 3 winless seasons in the Big Ten play, and they've never had over 3 conference wins in a single season. That is a miserable existence that you signed up for when you left the Big East. Moving along, West Virginia in the Big 12 since 2012 are 47 and 51, good for a .479 win percentage. Syracuse in the ACC is 26 and 56, .317. Louisville is 37 and 37, exactly 500. And wouldn't you know it, Pitt is 47 and 35, good for a .573 win percentage in the ACC. That is the best on this list of any school that jumped between 2012 and 2014. That's better than Miami's overall record in the ACC, and it is better than Texas A&M's record in the SEC. All of these teams left their old conferences for more money from a TV deal from a different conference, and Pitt's included in there. Got to give them some flack here. But, besides Pitt, most of these teams aren't winning or even competing in their new conferences. Pitt and Virginia Tech are the only teams to win a conference they've moved into. Miami and Missouri are the only other ones to make a championship game appearance. And the other 8, I believe, have not even made it to the title game. That's sad. I mean, these fan bases just don't have hope in these new conferences, especially Maryland and Rutgers, the schools that put this in motion. I don't think being a Rutgers fan is a happy experience. I don't think that being a Maryland fan going 7-6 every year is fulfilling. I don't think that being an A&M fan is as fun when you haven't played Texas in, a decade. And I mean, you might want to look at it and say it's the 12-team playoff that drove this round of expansion, but I kind of want to push back on that. It's clearly about the money, and the Big Ten's going to be raking in about $70,000 or $80,000 a year per school with this TV deal. That's what it's going to climb up to. It's insane. But I do want to talk about the 12-team playoff for a second, and I still maintain that it's good for all of college football. It would be better if the Pac-12 was still alive and the ACC didn't look like a zombie conference waiting to die, but there's more games with meaning under the 12-team playoff. There's more chances to play for the title. There's more chances to get into the postseason in the playoff, which is awesome for so many programs. I mean, a lot of programs would have never sniffed any sort of postseason game with meaning under systems like the BCS and the 4-team. And I think that is undeniably a good thing. But there is a downside, and I think that this downside has sort of been reinforced with this new round of conference realignment. I mean, just to use Pitt as an example, 13-9 might not have the same meaning under the expanded playoff because realistically, a 10-2 conference champion West Virginia gets into a 12-team playoff. Go back to 2021. The Bedlam win for Oklahoma State might have less meaning because there's a shot that both teams would have been in the playoff anyway. But does that mean it means less on a national stage? Maybe. Does it mean less to the fan bases of the schools? No. 13-9 would still be an insane upset in Pitt history. 2021 Bedlam would have been just a win that exercised demons for Oklahoma State. And they might matter in different ways. maybe these teams are fighting for a first round bye, or you're just trying to derail a rival's season so they can't cap it with a playoff appearance. Maybe instead of being 11-1, what if West Virginia's 9-2, and maybe that third loss gets them out of the playoff in 2007. These games still matter because there's that rivalry. There's the fan bases that hate each other. There's the shared history between the schools. And even if, say, they still get in the playoff anyway, your rival still gets in the playoff. Maybe you're a better seed. Maybe you get the home game instead of them. And we still could have had that if this round of realignment wasn't blowing up conferences and rivalries. Think about all the rivalries we've lost to realignment already. Games without playoff implication that still meant so much to these fan bases that have been dormant or might just be dead. As we all know, Pitt and West Virginia didn't play for a decade. That first game they played back was one of the most fun games in all of college football last season. The Pitt 6 was, like, once a month I'll go back to it and watch it just to watch that camera pan out and see the crowd exploding. And I was there, so it was different, but I can just imagine watching that on TV and just going, wow, that's a fun crowd. That's a fun place to be in, I can tell you that much. But, Missouri and Kansas, their rivalry is called the Border War, and they haven't played in over a decade. Nebraska has not had a real rival in the decade they've been in the Big Ten. They play Iowa every weekend to cap the season, but their real rivalries are for Nebraska or Oklahoma and Colorado, the teams that they've been playing forever, that they just don't anymore. They don't have any games that aren't hollow helmet games against Ohio State and Michigan. They are a school on a lonely island searching for meaning, and it's not. It doesn't help that they've been bad, but none of these other historically good teams mean the same when you're playing them. Take a look at the series they played against Oklahoma. Their fans were excited for that. Nebraska fans are different. They pack out every game, but I'll bet you that it meant a little bit more to them to play one of their historic rivals. And now Washington, Wazoo, and Oregon State are just they might be dead. We know that athletic directors don't like to do the thing everyone wants them to. Pitt and West Virginia didn't play for a decade. Pitt and Penn State don't play anymore because the old Penn State athletic director was a stick in the mud and refused to schedule Pitt. We've corrected one. We're bringing back Texas and Texas A&M playing after a decade, but that's got its own cost. We're losing Bedlam. We're losing every rivalry that a school in Texas has with UT, trying to bring down Goliath. And one thing before I move on to the second part of this episode, I just want to talk about sort of non-revenue sports because, as I've said on the show before, I'm a big fan of the Pitt volleyball program. And, it's no question that Pitt volleyball is not the main moneymaker for Pitt athletics. It's football, and everyone knows that football and the money it brings in is the driving force behind all of this realignment. But people have said it over the last couple of days. I think we retweeted a clip from Missouri coach Elijah Drinkwitz about, he asked the question, did anyone think about any other school but football? And I don't really think that anyone did. And I've talked about football this entire episode, but non-revenue sports are a completely different beast from football. Even basketball does bring in some money, but when you're talking about sports like baseball and softball and the fact that they have to travel for, a weekend series, if they're going away, they're away from campus for 3 to 4 days based on travel. And now teams like Oregon baseball and softball are going to have to travel across the country away from campus for 3 or 4 days while also being students. And the thing that really sort of brought my mind to this was a tweet from Oregon softball player Paige Sinicki. She's a junior for the team. And the tweet I saw that really got my attention was, I picked to play in a high-level softball conference where being close to home would allow my parents to come watch my games. It's unfortunate to hear that my senior year I'll be playing as far as New Jersey, Rutgers, as well as other East Coast schools. Now, she is from Henderson, Nevada, which I believe is just outside of Las Vegas. So, that's close to both the LA schools and the Arizona schools. And not only is the travel a major issue for non-football sports, but they are an afterthought. And a lot of players on the Oregon team echoed this sentiment, but it's still the same thing I've been saying the whole episode, right? It's all about regionality. It's all about playing in an area of the country, and it's just being forgotten about. I mean, when you think about these non-revenue sports, I mean, everyone knows for football that players don't come to school to learn. For the most part, I don't want to make a generalization, but the point of playing college football is to get to the NFL. For other non-revenue sports like softball or volleyball, where there's no major league in the United States to go to, you are going for your education, and now it just makes being a student harder. You're asking students to travel across the country for days at a time and then come back and take a fucking test. And that's it could be multiple times a week for some of these players. If they've maybe they'll spend a whole week away from campus. And if anyone has listened to this podcast has been a student under digital Zoom learning, that shit doesn't work. It is so much harder to learn online, and it's just making everyone's life worse that isn't a football player, and no one really thought about it. And she said she wanted to play close to home, and that is a factor for kids in every sport. And I don't know what they're gonna do now. I don't know. I feel bad. I feel bad for the players this affects, the players of the non-revenue sports. I feel terrible for the freshmen at Cal, Stanford, Wazoo, and Oregon State that were recruited on the promise of playing in the Pac-12, and now they are completely shit out of luck. I feel horrible for the fan bases of those four schools that they're just being told that they aren't good enough and they're not wanted, even though they've been a fixture of the sport for a century. And while I get it that money does, to play devil's advocate, right, which I don't want to do, but had Oregon and Washington not jumped to the Big Ten, had the four corner schools not jumped to the Big 12, you might have seen teams just cut non-revenue teams, because the deal that the Pac-12 got was completely untenable as far as keeping programs alive goes. I mean, at this point, they would have been so far behind on revenue, they probably would have gotten less or less than reported, because the deal was subscription-based. And I just keep going back to, why were these teams worth so much less as a collective, as a regional conference, than they are to these other leagues? How come Oregon and Washington are worth $30 million as part of the Big 10? How come the four corner schools are worth just the same amount of money in the Big 12, but somehow they aren't worth as much when they're together for, honestly, the best of all their student athletes, and probably the best of all their interests, right? Of the school's interests, of all the travel costs they have to accommodate, of I don't know. It all just sucks, and I guess I'll just wrap it up on that. The Pac-12 is dead, and all the TV networks have blood on their hands, and I don't know what else I can say besides that. Even though we can complain, I've spent about 28 minutes complaining about it, there's nothing that I can really do to affect it, because the people who are in charge have put a price on rivalry and tradition. And we're just going to probably just lose that aspect of the sport as it turns into an NFL light is the way I see it going, which makes me feel a lot worse than I did about 30 minutes ago, but what can you do? You know, the loss of rivalries, the loss of the upsets of your most hated rival, and yeah, we're just losing what makes college football special. Now, I don't want to end this episode on such a gloomy note, but I am going to put myself in a theoretical position of power and go over my power trip fantasy for what I think the conferences should be, and have a little fun with realignment that I think is actually good. I take a sip of water. So I'm using all of the current FBS schools. I am pulling up some schools from the FCS because it's my world and I do what I want. And then I am demoting some of them to FCS because I think these teams would have a better time in FCS. They might be more successful. We'll start with the ACC. In my new ACC, we have Clemson, Duke, Florida State, UNC, NC State, Wake Forest, Miami, Virginia, and then I'm pulling ECU, UCF, and USF up from... I'm pulling UCF out of the Big 12 because they're sort of on an island there as well. But I'm making it a conference of like the southeastern Atlantic seaboard. And then I'm splitting the northern half of the ACC into this maybe a northeastern, I'll call it the Appalachian Conference, with Penn State, Pitt, Rutgers, BC, Syracuse, Louisville, West Virginia, Maryland, Virginia Tech, Cincinnati, UConn, and then personally, I'd bring up Stony Brook, but that's because I'm from Long Island. I want them to be a good football team. So in my perfect world, right, New York State is diverting funds to Stony Brook to build a football program. But if you think that's a little too crazy, we'll slot in Temple there. And I think that would keep everything pretty much intact. I would mandate legally that Virginia and Virginia Tech have to play each other on rivalry weekend. But other than that, I mean, you are making a conference for the Northeast, which has never had one. You've got Pitt, Penn State, West Virginia in that rivalry triangle. You're bringing in Louisville and Cincinnati and Virginia Tech and West Virginia for all those Appalachian rivalries. And the other thing is you're putting schools like BC, Rutgers, Syracuse, UConn in a conference that they can do well, and their fans can be happy in this conference, you know. And I think that the southern half, or like what I would call the ACC, or keep the ACC name, is keeping most of that historic conference intact. Like I mentioned earlier, Virginia Tech is a very recent addition to the conference, so it's not like they have a lot of history there. Also, as I've said before on the podcast, I want Pitt and Virginia Tech to start a real rivalry, so this is also more personal wish fulfilling for me. The Big Ten, I'm going to make it have 10 teams again. I'm also going to keep it as a Midwestern conference. So that's Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Indiana, Purdue, Northwestern, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. Basically what the Big Ten should be. We're jettisoning out Nebraska and all three of the schools east of the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. Moving to the Big 12, I am reverting the Big 12 back to kind of its late 2000s form with Texas, TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Iowa State, Missouri, Colorado, and Nebraska. I'm bringing those three schools back because that's where they should be. I am keeping A&M in the SEC because I think they have more of an SEC vibe, but we'll get to that later. Let's go to the SEC now. It's going to be Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, Kentucky, Florida, Vanderbilt, Alabama, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Auburn, A&M, and Georgia Tech. More or less unchanged. I think that even though Arkansas and A&M have history with a lot of these Big 12 schools, they kind of have an SEC vibe. And honestly, I'm putting Georgia Tech here just to be mean. I think it's funny. And then as far as the Pac-12 goes, I'm splitting it into a Southwest and Northwest conference. So the Southwest would be USC, UCLA, Arizona, Cal, Arizona State, Stanford, UTSA, Memphis, Houston, SMU, and did I say New Mexico State? Maybe I did. I don't know. And then I have a Northwest Conference with Oregon, Washington, Oregon State, Washington State, BYU, Utah. And then I'm calling up these 6 teams from the top of the FCS: North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Montana State, Idaho, and North Dakota. I'm bringing in Idaho mainly because they do have a historic rivalry with Washington State, and I think it would be cool to make teams go to the Kibbie Dome because that's one of the most unique stadiums in all of football. And if you have never seen a picture of it, do that. It's very funny looking. Moving to independents, Notre Dame, Liberty, Army, Navy, pretty simple. As far as the group of 5 goes, I'm keeping the MAC completely as is. The MAC is sort of a conference in amber from a different time when conferences actually were centered around an area of the country. If you don't know off the top of your head, that's Ohio, Buffalo, Bowling Green, Miami, Ohio, Kent State, Akron, Eastern, Western, and Central Michigan, Toledo, Ball State, and NIU. It's perfect as is. So moving to the Sun Belt, I'm going to keep it as is for the most part. Right now the Sun Belt has 15 teams. And those are JMU, Coastal, Marshall, App State, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, Old Dominion, Troy, South Alabama, Southern Miss, Louisiana, ULM, Texas State, and Arkansas State. Realized that they only have 14 because I typed in a school twice. But I'm adding Tulane here because I couldn't fit them in the new ACC, and I think that they fit well here with Southern Miss and South Alabama, as well as the 2 Louisiana schools. As far as the Mountain West goes, I am keeping that intact more or less. I've got Boise, Air Force, Wyoming, Utah State, Colorado State, Wyoming, New Mexico, Fresno, San Jose, San Diego, UNLV, Hawaii, Nevada, and I am throwing Sacramento State in here because I feel like it. I think that'll be fun. They've been a really good FCS team, and I'm rewarding them for that. Just for now realizing I think I left out New Mexico here. We'll throw them. No, I didn't. I just said that. Okay, never mind. Sorry. Then the only conference left is basically it would be the CUSA. It's going to be Western Kentucky, North Texas, Middle Tennessee State, UAB, FAU, Louisiana Tech, and then Sam Houston, Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State, all of which are poised to make the jump to FBS this year. And then I threw in Incarnate Word because I wanted to make the conference have an even number, because even numbers are nice. And then demoting Temple, maybe if you don't want Stony Brook in the FBS, you keep them around. UMass, Florida International, Charlotte, Tulsa, and Rice to FCS, because I think they would have more fun down there where they can be better teams. And that's my ideal world where you have conferences that actually make sense based on numbers and the region of the nation that they're named after. Well, I hope that was fun to sort of cap off a sort of downer episode about realignment. It's hard to not feel sad about losing a lot of what made college football special. But, hey man, season's almost here. I think this is, barring any news that comes out, the last time we're going to talk about realignment on this show. Just a reminder, like I mentioned at the top, hype videos coming out 12 o'clock on the 8th. Next week, we're going to be doing our show about picking all the other conference championships throughout for the rest of the 9 FBS leagues. Talking win total over and unders for other teams we like around the country, and then week after that, it's week 0 previews. Season's here. I can't wait for football to be here so that I can focus on talking about football instead of doom and gloom my head about conference realignment and worrying where Pitt's going to go. If you want my pick to where I want Pitt to go, it's the Big 12. WVU and Cincinnati are baked into that conference. You can probably pull along Louisville, Virginia Tech, and NC State to make sort of a Eastern segment of that conference, throwing UCF there too. But that's going to do it all from me. If you like the episode, follow us on Twitter or X or whatever it's called at SimplifyPod, and we'll see you next time.